Now, this administrative state is the army that's been put together by the progressives, by the statists. It doesn't exist in the Constitution. It's what I've always called the fourth branch of government. People now realize it. What do they call it, Mr. Producer? They call it the, whatever they call it. Not the fifth column. The theology of administrative science and historicism, after more than a century of progressive centralized government in America, has demonstrated in the swamp, is what they call it, in infinite ways that it is not a science at all. The massive present-day administrative state, or the swamp as people call it, is inflicted with extensive imperfections and dislocations. Its widespread shortcomings and deficiencies include enormous levels of waste, fraud, and abuse, extensive managerial incompetence and delinquencies, overlapping programs and red tape, and failed promises and objectives, all of which are documented in countless investigations, audits, reports, and books, including in a book I wrote, Plunder and Deceit. There's simply no validation of a vast, complex, modern society humanely and effectively managed by a centralized Leviathan reporting to a single chief executive, the president. There simply is not. Since the principles undergirding America's founding are beyond mortal law, they are beyond the reach of the progressives and the administrative state. Hence, the war on our founding principles, beliefs, and traditions was and is intended to, among other things, stop legitimate inquiry into teaching of first principles or purposes. They are to make, they are to be made intellectually and culturally off limits. That is, our belief system, our values, our principles. So what is left is only one acceptable and overarching agenda, that of the progressive, a.k.a. the statists. The only relevant political and historical discussion, then, is about their ideas, and more specifically about their promotion. Secularism, value relativism, social experimentation, unified political power, but never about slowing the pace or altering the main thrust and trajectory of progressivism. There can be no serious consideration of constitutional limits on the administrative state, no serious debate about governmental spending and debt, no serious argument about the so-called science of climate change, no serious discussion of effective reforms for governmental entitlements and programs. None. The progressives' deliberate effort to denude the individual of his free will and uniqueness, to organize mankind by a growing and ubiquitous centralized authority and collective command into a conforming uniform mass, is the rejection of everything upon which this nation was founded. Now, this gives the full or bigger context of what you see taking place today.
He's here. Now, broadcasting from the underground command post, deep in the bowels of a hidden bunker, somewhere under the brick and steel of a nondescript building, we've once again made contact with our leader, Mark Levin.
Hello, everybody. Mark Levin here. Our number, 877-381-3811, 877-381-3811. Can we delve a little bit more deeply here? Can we delve a little bit more deeply? Liberty. We've touched on this before, then we touched on it again, and now we're going to touch on it yet again. This word liberty means different things to different people. Some people think you get liberty out of government. Free college, free health care, pensions, that this is liberty. Is that liberty? Or is liberty more a personal and private matter? That is, the freedom to move, the freedom to invest, the freedom to collect, the freedom not to do those things. There are these concepts as I've explained before, and really by a man who's not alive. I wish I knew him. I would have loved to have talked to him. Isaiah Berlin. And he was a journalist, but he was also quite the philosopher. And he died in 1997. He was born in Russia. He was a Russian-British political theorist and philosopher mostly. So he divided liberty into these two general but distinct categories, positive liberty and negative liberty. And others have confused this. And I don't think it's been particularly helpful. Because positive liberty is not what you think. And negative liberty is not what you think. When you read the Bill of Rights, when you read the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, they are intended to protect the individual, and they are intended to protect federalism. But mostly to protect the individual against the central government. When you read the Bill of Rights, they put forth negative liberty rights. It doesn't mean they're negative like bad. It means certain things cannot be done to you. The government is prohibited from doing certain things to you. Positive liberty, to the extent that it's liberty at all, are affirmative steps taken by the government in determining who will rule over whom. Okay? Who will rule over whom? So people have confused these, saying negative liberty means, people are trying to take your rights away. Quite the opposite. Conservatives and constitutionalists identify with, embrace, whether they know it or not, negative liberty. Statists, big government types, embrace positive liberty. And so they're constantly promoting government. You want equality? You need more government. You want freedom? Oddly enough, you need more government. You want justice? You need more government. And yet, what is the institution that threatens your liberty the most? Government. What is the institution that threatens equality the most? Government. What is the institution that threatens the entire civil society the most? Government. It's not a company. It's not an individual. It's not a group of people. It's not the private sector. Private sector is dispersed. There's diversity in the private sector. It's very complex. It's almost infinite in what it does and what people do, making untold number of decisions each day. Individuals, let alone we in the aggregate. And the problem with positive liberty is if it's taken to an extreme, positive liberty isn't liberty at all. It's tyranny. When you hear Bernie Sanders speak as if he's speaking for the people, for the masses, for the workers, Bernie Sanders talks like a populist. Populism, which for some bizarre reason has been embraced by some conservatives as a good thing. Populism is very dangerous. Populism taken to the extreme is the mob. It's anarchy. The framers of your Constitution feared populism and pure democracy every bit as much as they feared a centralized government and monarchy. Remember what I said. The Declaration of Independence talks about God-given unalienable rights that each one of you have at birth. No government gives it. No government can legitimately remove it. And they are based on natural rights. The Golden Rule is not legislation. And yet the Golden Rule is understood to be correct. Whether you're an American, or whether you're born in France, or whether you're born in Israel, or whether you're born in Guatemala, wherever you are. Doesn't mean these are just societies. That's a separate issue. The point is, it's a truism. It's a universal truth. Or as Aristotle called it, universal law. There's universal law, he said, and practical law. That is, man-made law and universal law. Now, he didn't know if there was a God or not, and he debated with himself over that issue and so forth, but that's not the point here. The point is that the founders of this country embraced that, like Aristotle did, like Cicero did. Now, how do we know that? Because they told us. That's how we know. And it wasn't just them. They embraced it like others. So positive liberty, taken to the extreme, isn't liberty at all. And yet it's the kind of thing that you hear Bernie Sanders talk about. And I use him as a foil, but you understand the point. Bernie Sanders, his ideology, his mindset has more in common with the writings of Karl Marx and Frederick Engels than it does with the writings of John Locke or Adam Smith or Edmund Burke. His ideology has nothing in common with the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution. Doesn't mean he won't rave it around. Doesn't mean he won't use it for purposes where he thinks it's convenient, because the ends does justify the means if you have his mindset. So when they talk about free education, you think about freedom. When they talk about free health care, you think about freedom. If you're of this positive liberty mindset. But if you're of the negative liberty mindset, you go, whoa, wait a minute. Who's making this decision for me? I want to make this decision. No, you don't understand. We get to make this decision in government. We have our experts. Our experts make the decision. Our experts develop national health care. Our experts determine what hospitals will and won't do. Our experts determine what doctors will and won't do. And we need absolute equality, too. Egalitarianism. Why should somebody get better care than somebody else? And so what happened? These so-called experts aren't experts at all. They're ideologues. They're theoreticians. Barack Obama's not an expert in health care. He's not an expert in any care. Even doctors aren't experts in all kinds of medical care. They're experts in the area they're in, if they're experts at all. And so you have ideologues, political, academic, bureaucratic, whatever. Ideologues making decisions for you. But don't worry, it's free. That's positive liberty. Conversely, you have individuals like me and many of you who say, you know what? I want to be free to make these decisions myself. I want to be free to pick a kind of policy that I want. I want to be free to use an insurance company that I want to use. That's considered, believe it or not, negative liberty, because the government's not involved. People aren't ruling over you. Now, there's no perfect system, but it's clear which one is pressed more toward individual liberty and which one presses more toward centralized government control, right? So when you hear Bernie Sanders say, it could be Elizabeth or whomever, Bernie Sanders and his ilk say, look at these corporations. Look at Disney, I think he said the other day. And I'm no fan of this Iger or any of those leftists who run that company. But again, that's not the point. Why are they doing so well, but the workers there can barely feed themselves? So what's the solution? Government control. Government controls what the company makes. Government controls who gets what in the company. Government controls how much the quote-unquote workers get. And how do we know what they should get? Is there any kind of market system or anything? No. Bernie Sanders will decide what the living wage is. Bernie Sanders will decide if somebody needs $1 million, $100 million, $500,000, whatever it is. Bernie Sanders will decide. Now, there's a lot of problems with this, including the fact that it's not only impracticable, and for him to get it right, it's impossible, but these are very complex things that have real and unintended consequences that usually wind up destroying the very target of their so-called compassion, destroying the company, destroying the investors, and destroying the employees. But that's okay, you see, because Bernie Sanders is compassionate and he's noble and he means well. He's not trying to make a profit. He's trying to do the right thing. And despite now decades and decades and decades with human experience on how awful this ideology and this theory is, whether it's Cuba or Venezuela, or as they say in Massachusetts, Cuba or Venezuela, whether it's China and the gulags that they have there, or North Korea, or even if you take Scandinavia. Look at Scandinavia, how wonderful Scandinavia. Scandinavia is not wonderful at all. And by the way, it's less socialist in many of those countries than Bernie Sanders would have you believe, as a matter of fact. But that's okay. Look at the human tragedy that's taken place with this ideology, the more aggressive form of it. The more aggressive form of it. Look at the bodies. And then look at capitalism and constitutionalism. Where are the bodies? There are no bodies. Look at the gulags. There are no gulags. Look at the political prisoners. There are no political prisoners. And yet those who advance in the extreme, the so-called positive liberty, which is tyranny, and dress it up as populism, as they continue to centralize power in fewer and fewer hands. Or for the people. How so? Look at the destitution, the impoverishment, and the casualties, the human casualties that result from that ideology. They don't result from capitalism. They don't result from constitutional republicanism, do they? No, they don't. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.
Mark, what the hell does any of this have to do with anything? What does it have to do with Samantha Bee? What does it have to do with the media mindset today? What does it have to do with anything? Well, it has everything to do with it. These people believe they are warriors for the cause of paradise. These people believe that the founding is to be discredited, and what you embrace is discredited. These people believe that you and I, and this president, stand in the way of paradise, of perfecting humanity, of perfecting our government. That you and I are greedy, selfish, that you and I are dumb. We don't see the big picture. That you and I are throwbacks, particularly if you are a person of faith, particularly if you're an evangelical Christian, God forbid, particularly if you hold on to these old traditions and values. There's something wrong with you. Because the progressive, a.k.a. the statist, has a monopoly on virtue, when in fact, in so many instances, they have no virtue at all. They have monopoly on what's good and what's right, and they dare not allow a free and open debate for those who might disagree with them. And so you can see this on college campuses as an example. So much for academic freedom and free speech, or for having conservative speakers, or conservatives speak at graduations. It just doesn't occur, or it occurs so rarely it really doesn't matter. So, the academy, as we like to call it, is the worst place to have a free debate of ideas. Why? Because the academy, colleges and universities, are the tip of the spear in groupthink and indoctrination, in the conquering of these notions of academic freedom and freedom of speech by the faculty. And the faculty is well schooled in these notions that I've been talking about. Positive liberty, statism, progressivism, that the great utopia is just over there. If we can clean out existing society, wipe out racism, wipe out inequality, expand freedom through free stuff. You know, I was telling you about this Isaiah Berlin, and I want to paraphrase him to you. And he makes the point, as I've said when this book originally came out, my book. He said, if you leave the battle of ideas to the intellectuals and the academics, you will lose your country and you will lose your liberty. In other words, what's going on in our universities and colleges and in many of our public schools is destroying our country. And I would take it a step further. The more people who are imported into the United States, who refuse to be assimilated, or are not assimilated because of the barriers that the progressives have created in our own country, because remember, they promote balkanization and groupthink and and so forth and so on. It's impossible to maintain the culture, and it's impossible to maintain the civil society. It's impossible. And so when you look at whether it's immigration, whether you look on whether it's American sovereignty, whether it is what goes on in our public school system, in our colleges and universities, the public debate that occurs, even these low IQ comedians and so forth, it not to a man, not to a woman, but damn near close enough. It's the same mindset, it's the same groupthink, it's the same symbols, it's the same trigger words: racism, inequality, injustice, social justice, economic justice, environmental justice. I'll be right back.